Aria sat beside the hospital bed with her hand inside his. She had held it so long that her fingers felt numb, but she didn't let go. His breathing stayed slow under the soft hum of the machines. His face looked calm, almost peaceful, until his eyes opened for the first time in days. Silas blinked once, twice. His gaze moved across the room before landing on her. Aria leaned forward. "Silas, you're awake." He didn't answer. His stare stayed steady, almost blank. He studied her face like he was looking at a stranger. The silence stretched until he pulled his hand away from hers. "Who are you?" The question wasn't harsh. It was quiet, confused, and final in a way that struck the air out of her chest. Aria froze. She had prepared herself for many outcomes, but not this. Not him forgetting the story she carried in her heart. "Silas," she whispered. "It's me." He watched her with the same confusion, waiting for something inside him to respond to her voice. Nothing did. A nurse stepped in with a quick check of the monitor, but Aria barely heard her. The world around her faded while she looked at the man she loved, the same man who once waited outside her workplace just to walk her home. He didn't know her now. He didn't remember her smile. He didn't remember their nights by the harbor. He didn't remember their promises. Aria swallowed the pain rising in her throat. She held herself steady, even as her heart pulled apart in quiet pieces. She had come here ready to bring him comfort. Instead, she faced a truth she didn't know how to breathe through. Silas turned his face away, overwhelmed by his own confusion. Aria stayed right where she was. She didn't touch him again. She didn't push her presence on him. She simply whispered, "I'm here," even though he didn't know why those words meant so much. This was the moment her story changed. The moment love met loss without warning. The moment she realized she would have to fight for the place she once held in his heart. Aria's breath shook as she stepped back from the bed. The man who once held her close now looked through her without recognition. His confusion cut deeper than anger ever would. It rewrote everything she thought she was prepared for. In those first seconds after he asked, "Who are you?" the truth hit her fast and sharp. Their shared memories meant nothing to him. Their promises carried no weight. Their story, the one she kept alive in her heart, had vanished from his mind. She stood still while her world shifted under her feet. Her heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. Losing him would have broken her. Losing his memory of her tested something even harder, the strength to stay when he had no reason to reach for her. Silas watched her with the blank concern someone might give a stranger. He didn't know the sound of her laugh or the warmth in her voice. He didn't know how many nights they talked until sunrise. He didn't know he once said she was the only place his soul felt quiet. Aria felt tears pushing behind her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She refused to let heartbreak speak louder than hope. She steadied herself, holding on to one truth. She loved him enough to face this moment without running. The nurse asked if she needed a minute. Aria shook her head. She refused to move, even as her chest tightened. These first seconds were enough to change the entire journey ahead. She wasn't losing Silas. She was losing the version of him that remembered her, and she had to decide if she would stay long enough to help him find her again. The shock wasn't in the machines or the wires around him. It was in his eyes when he asked a question she never thought she would hear from him. "Who are you?" That moment cut through every memory they had shared. It held the kind of silence that shakes the ground beneath a person's feet. If someone you loved looked at you without recognition, what would you do? Would you walk away to protect your heart, or stay and fight for the story they no longer remembered? Most people hope love is strong enough to hold steady, but no one expects to prove it in a moment like this. Aria stood at a crossroads no one prepares for. She could let him rebuild his life without her, or she could stay and offer him pieces of a past he couldn't see. Both paths carried pain. Both paths demanded strength. And either choice would shape the rest of her story. Silas didn't know she once held his face in her hands while he whispered his dreams. He didn't know she sat by his side during storms and quiet nights. He didn't know he had already trusted her with parts of himself he never shared with the world. Now she had to decide if she wanted to guide him back to what they once had. But what if the man who forgot her ends up falling for her again? What if the story doesn't end at loss, but starts again in a new way, stronger than before? That is where her journey truly begins. Before we follow Aria through the hardest chapter of her life, welcome to Lord of Hearts. Here, every story carries emotion, truth, and the kind of lessons that stay with you long after the screen fades. If you are new, settle in. If you are returning, thank you for being part of a place where love is explored through patience, loyalty, and choices that matter. What you are about to hear is not simply a romance. It is a story about strength when the heart is tested. A story about holding on when life asks you to start again. A story that reminds us that love is not fragile, even when memory is. Aria's journey begins at the side of a man who once knew her better than anyone. A man who now sees her with no recognition at all. Yet she stays, not out of desperation, but out of the quiet belief that love deserves a chance to breathe, even when shattered. If you value stories that touch the heart, challenge the spirit, and offer gentle guidance through life's complicated moments, you are in the right place. Stay with me as we unfold a path marked by patience, loss, and a second chance neither of them expected. Before we continue deeper into Aria's journey, take a moment to support the channel. If stories about love, strength, and second chances speak to you, please tap the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss a new story here on Lord of Hearts. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need a reminder that love can grow again, even after loss. Now, let's return to Aria as she faces the choice that will shape everything that follows. Before Silas ever stepped into that coffee shop, Aria lived a life marked by steady habits and quiet choices. She woke before dawn each day, not because she had to, but because the morning gave her peace. She enjoyed silence before the world grew loud. She moved through her small apartment with gentle steps, preparing herself for another shift at the Harbour Cafe. Her life wasn't filled with dramatic moments or grand events. It was built on small routines she held close. The same breakfast, the same walk to work, the same warm greeting she offered customers. People saw her as calm and dependable, someone who listened more than she spoke. She didn't chase attention. She didn't chase approval. She carried a stillness that made others feel comfortable around her. But behind that calm surface, Aria carried a past that shaped her. She had learned early that loud promises fade fast, so she grew to trust actions instead of words. She held on to loyalty, honesty, and patience because those were the things she wished someone had given her in her younger years. Her heart carried tenderness, but she protected it. She didn't give it away easily. Outside of work, she kept her world simple. She loved reading by the harbour. She loved slow walks along the water. She loved quiet nights with soft music and a cup of tea. She stayed clear of drama and noise, choosing instead a life that didn't bring unnecessary chaos. People who passed through the cafe often wondered why she wasn't married or dating. She always smiled softly and replied, "I'm taking my time." The truth was simple. Aria wanted a connection that came naturally, without pressure, without games, without pretending to be someone she wasn't. She wanted someone who saw her, not the worker behind the counter, not the calm face people confided in, but the woman who felt deeply, even when she hid it well. At this point in her life, Aria didn't know her world would shift soon. She didn't know a stranger would walk into the cafe and quietly rearrange the rhythm of her days. She didn't know love would approach her in the form of a man who carried his own storms. For now, she only knew her routine, her peace, and the steady heart she guarded carefully. Aria moved through life with a softness people noticed before they learned her name. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't push herself into conversations. Her calm presence eased the mood in any room she walked into, which made her a quiet favorite among the regulars at the cafe. Her days followed rhythms she found comforting. She opened the shop with steady hands, brewed the first pot of coffee with care, and arranged pastries in a way that made the display feel warm. She greeted customers with a genuine smile, not because she had to, but because she believed small kindness could steady a person's day. Aria preferred moments that didn't demand much: a slow morning, a walk along the harbour after her shift, a book tucked under her arm as she settled on her favourite bench. She valued silence. She valued spaces where nothing rushed her forward. Peace wasn't something she stumbled upon. It was something she chose again and again. Even her apartment reflected this: the soft glow of a single lamp, shelves filled with books she returned to when her heart needed grounding, a small plant by her window that she cared for with steady attention. There was nothing extravagant about her life, nothing loud or dramatic. But that simplicity was intentional. People often misunderstood quiet people, thinking silence meant loneliness. Aria wasn't lonely. She gave her energy to the world in gentle doses. She poured kindness in steady streams rather than bursts. She found fulfillment in listening, observing, and offering warmth when others needed it most. Her co-workers admired her patience. Customers opened up to her without knowing why. Children who came in with their parents gravitated toward her because she had a way of making them feel safe. Aria didn't try to be any of these things. It was in her nature to move lightly, to speak thoughtfully, and to make the spaces around her feel steady. She avoided chaos because she had seen how easily life could slip out of balance. She stayed away from loud arguments, quick tempers, and people who lived in extremes. Peace mattered to her. It shaped her choices, her friendships, her habits. But even people who love peace can feel the weight of longing. Late at night, when she sat with a cup of warm tea and stared at the harbour lights from her window, she wondered whether anyone would ever meet her in the stillness she carried. Someone who didn't mistake her quiet nature for weakness. Someone who valued the soft things in life as much as she did. She never expected that person to be a man with influence, power, and a world much louder than hers. She never expected someone like Silas Rowan to find comfort in her quiet. Aria's gentle nature made her easy to admire, but her strength came from quiet places almost no one saw. She had learned to comfort others even when she had no one to comfort her. She carried her pain in a steady way, never letting it spill into her work or her interactions. People felt safe around her because she understood hardship without speaking about her own. She rarely shared her past, but fragments of it shaped her every day. She had once trusted someone who made promises without meaning them. The disappointment stayed with her longer than the person did. It taught her to move slowly in love and to value sincerity above everything else. She didn't speak about that hurt. She simply lived with the lesson it left behind. Her life looked simple from the outside, but simplicity often hides the weight someone carries. Aria's heart was tender because she had rebuilt it with care. She didn't let bitterness shape her. She didn't let fear make her cold. She chose patience. She chose kindness. She chose to believe that love, when real, didn't rush or break people for sport. People saw her as someone who always had everything under control, but the truth was softer. She longed for a connection built on trust, not charm. She longed for someone who didn't mistake her silence for indifference. She longed to be seen the way she saw others, with compassion, depth, and truth. Her co-workers noticed how she placed herself last. She covered shifts when others needed help. She listened when customers shared their troubles. She offered calm words when tensions rose. Aria didn't do these things for praise. She did them because she believed in gentle care. Still, there were moments after work when she sat alone on her balcony and wondered when it would be her turn to be understood without explanation. When someone would listen to her with the same attention she offered the world. She didn't crave grand gestures. She craved presence. She craved a heart that moved with hers. This yearning wasn't loud. It wasn't desperate. It lived quietly inside her, waiting for the right person to step into her life with steady intention. Aria never imagined that the one who would see her clearly, the one who would give her the gentle love she waited for, would be a man with a complicated world, a demanding life, and a heart that sought refuge in her calm. Before Silas Rowan entered her story, viewers see her as she truly is, a woman worth loving, a woman worth remembering, a woman whose loyalty does not fade, even when tested. Aria's quiet nature didn't come from shyness. It came from experience. Years before Silas entered her world, she had opened her heart to someone who didn't treat it with care. That relationship promised stability in the beginning, but ended with broken trust. He had demanded more of her than he ever gave. He dismissed her feelings. He ignored her efforts. When she finally walked away, she did so with a steady step, but her heart carried. The reminder that love without respect drains a person in ways nothing else does. She never spoke harshly about that chapter. She didn't let it turn her bitter. She let it teach her. It showed her how easy it was to mistake attention for affection. It showed her how love loses meaning when it comes from someone who only values convenience. It showed her that caring deeply required patience, not control. Since then, Aria protected her peace with intention. She didn't jump into relationships. She didn't allow empty promises. She didn't chase people who didn't offer sincerity in return. Her guard wasn't a wall. It was a filter, shaped by the pain she chose not to repeat. Close friends told her she deserved someone who saw her worth without needing reminders. Someone who noticed the small things she offered. Someone who valued her presence without waiting for a grand reason. Aria agreed quietly, but she stopped expecting it. She knew love arrived on its own timeline, not hers. So she poured her energy into her work, her books, her long, peaceful walks. She healed in slow, steady ways. She didn't push herself to trust again. She waited for someone who would earn it naturally. Her past didn't define her, but it shaped her expectations. If someone joined her life, they needed to meet her with honesty. If someone wanted her heart, they needed to offer theirs in return. If someone stayed, they needed to choose her without hesitation. She didn't know Silas Rowan yet. She didn't know how deeply he would value her. She didn't know he would treat her soft nature as something precious, not something to take advantage of. But this quiet strength, this mixture of tenderness and guarded hope, was exactly what prepared her for the kind of love she never saw coming. Aria's core values weren't shaped by chance. They were choices she made daily. Loyalty came naturally to her. It wasn't about staying through anything. It was about standing with people who treated her with respect. Those she cared about never had to question her support. She showed up for friends when they needed help. She stayed with co-workers through difficult shifts. Loyalty for her wasn't loud. It was consistent. Honesty guided her decisions. She spoke with care, not force, but she never misled anyone. When she didn't have the energy to engage, she said so gently. When someone crossed a boundary, she addressed it with calm clarity. She didn't play with emotions or hide her intentions. Her truth came with kindness, not harshness, and people trusted her because of it. Patience was the quiet thread that ran through everything she did. She understood that healing took time, connections took time, growth took time. She never rushed the people around her to meet her expectations. She allowed friendships to evolve naturally. She allowed life to unfold without forcing answers before they were ready. Even in hard seasons, she held herself steady, waiting for clarity instead of reacting out of fear. These values shaped every interaction she had. They made her compassionate. They made her dependable. They made her rare. Anyone who stepped into her life sensed the depth in her stillness. They felt safe around her because she never demanded more than they were willing to give. She listened before judging. She tried to understand before reacting. And she forgave without forgetting the lessons that protected her heart. This was the woman Silas Rowan would soon meet. A woman whose loyalty could steady a storm. A woman whose honesty could soften defenses. A woman whose patience could hold an entire love story together. When Silas finally walked through that cafe door, he stepped into the life of someone who lived with quiet strength, someone who would shape his future more than he ever expected. The first time Aria saw him, it was early morning before the rush began. She was wiping down the counter when a tall man stepped through the door, with a quiet confidence that caught her attention without effort. He didn't enter like someone who wanted to be noticed. He entered like someone who carried his own calm with him. Silas Rowan paused at the entrance for a moment, taking in the cafe as if measuring the atmosphere before choosing where to place himself. His clothes were simple, clean, and understated. Nothing about him announced wealth, yet something about his posture hinted at responsibility that few people carried. Aria offered her usual warm greeting. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" He looked up at her, and for a brief moment, the room felt different. His gaze wasn't sharp or intense. It was steady, focused, and respectful. He didn't scan her face the way some customers did. He met her eyes with the kind of attention that suggested he valued the small interactions most people overlooked. "Black coffee, please," he said in a soft, measured voice. Aria nodded and moved to prepare his order. She tried not to stare, but she found herself observing him as he chose a seat by the window, the one most people ignored. He sat with a posture both relaxed and alert, like someone used to watching the world quietly. When she placed the cup on his table, he thanked her with a polite nod. No smile, no attempt at small talk, but there was a calmness about him that lingered in the air after she walked away. He stayed longer than most first-time customers. He watched the water outside. He answered emails on his phone. He glanced around the cafe with quiet appreciation, as if he found comfort in the ordinary setting. Before leaving, he paused at the counter again. "Your coffee is good," he said. The compliment wasn't dramatic, but it felt sincere. Aria thanked him, sensing something different about him, something grounded and thoughtful. He left without giving away anything else. But the moment the door closed behind him, Aria sensed she had just met someone who would shift the rhythm of her days without meaning to. Silas returned the next morning, stepping into the cafe with the same steady ease. He didn't rush through the door or move with the urgency of someone important. Yet his presence shifted the room in a way Aria felt before she even looked up. He carried a quiet power that didn't need display. No raised voice, no commanding gestures, just a calm certainty in the way he walked, stood, and observed the world around him. Some people gained attention through noise. Silas gained it through stillness. Aria noticed how he scanned the cafe when he arrived, not out of suspicion, but habit, as if he was always aware of details others overlooked. He noticed a chair out of place and moved it back. He stepped aside when someone rushed past him, allowing space without irritation. He held the door open for an elderly couple without expecting acknowledgement. Small things, done with intention. When he approached the counter, he didn't check his phone or divide his attention. He looked at Aria fully. "Good morning," he said, his tone calm but warm enough to feel genuine. "Morning," she replied, surprised by the slight shift in his voice, a little softer than the day before. He ordered the same drink, but this time he added, "I'm starting to think this might become a routine." Aria smiled lightly. "We open every day around the same time. Then I'll be here." The words were simple, not flirtatious, not forward, just honest. She prepared his coffee while he watched the harbor through the window. Silas didn't fidget, didn't adjust his watch, didn't tap his foot. His patience seemed natural, almost peaceful. When she brought the cup to his table, he thanked her again. But this time, he looked up long enough for her to see something gentle in his eyes. He listened when she spoke, even in short exchanges. He noticed small details, like when she tucked her hair behind her ear or when she lifted a tray with more weight than usual. He observed with intention, not judgment. There was no arrogance in him, no entitlement, just awareness. And though Aria didn't know his name yet, she sensed he carried responsibility that stretched far beyond the cafe walls. A man with influence who didn't need to announce it. A man whose calm presence hinted at a world much larger than the small corner of the harbor. Silas Rowan possessed a type of quiet power that made people pay attention without knowing why. Aria included. Silas became part of Aria's mornings without either of them naming it. He walked in around the same time each day, offering a quiet greeting and a small nod that felt more familiar with every visit. At first, their exchanges were short and polite, but over time, they stretched a little longer, settling into a rhythm that felt natural. He learned how she liked her mornings, slow, steady, organized. She learned that he preferred silence over noisy chatter, and that he appreciated being asked how he was, even if he answered with a single word. One morning, when he reached the counter, she asked, "Rough day ahead?" He raised a brow slightly. "Is it that obvious? You look like you're solving too many things at once," she said. His laugh was quiet, but genuine. "You're not wrong." From that moment, something shifted. Silas began sharing small pieces of his daily life. Not the heavy details, but glimpses of the pressure he carried. Aria responded with simple observations, gentle questions, and a calm that helped him breathe a little easier. They didn't rush these moments. They didn't try to impress each other. They simply allowed the connection to form. Some days, Silas stayed longer than usual. He finished his drink slowly, watching Aria move through the shop, noticing the kindness she offered customers without forcing it. He admired her steadiness, the way she made people feel seen without trying. Aria noticed him too, the way he adjusted his approach depending on who he spoke to, the care he put into even the smallest interaction, the quiet concern in his eyes on the mornings he seemed tired. She didn't ask about his work yet, but she sensed it demanded more of him than he ever admitted. He didn't speak like someone who wanted to impress. He spoke like someone who appreciated the rare chance to be ordinary for a while. One afternoon, as Aria wiped down a table near where he sat, Silas said, "You're easy to talk to." She looked up, surprised. "You don't say much." "I don't need to," he replied. "You listen." Her cheeks warmed slightly. "I try to." I noticed it wasn't a confession. It wasn't a hint. It was a simple truth, one that softened the space between them. These gradual exchanges built trust. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. Just two people learning each other's quiet habits, one moment at a time. By the third week, Silas didn't visit the cafe out of routine. He visited because something about Aria made his world feel lighter. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both felt the shift. Their connection deepened outside the cafe one quiet evening when Aria stepped out after closing and found Silas waiting near the entrance. He wasn't leaning against anything or trying to catch her attention. He simply stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching the harbor with a thoughtful expression. "You're still here," she said. "I wasn't ready to head home," he replied. "Mind if I walk with you?" She hesitated for a second, not out of fear, but surprise. Silas sensed it and added gently, "Only if you're comfortable." Aria nodded, and they began walking side by side along the waterfront. The air carried a soft chill, and the lights reflected across the water in steady patterns. Their steps matched naturally. Neither of them rushed to fill the silence. It felt easy, peaceful, like they had walked this path before, even though it was their first time doing it together. Silas spoke first. "This place helps me think." Aria looked ahead. "It helps me breathe." He smiled. "That too." As they continued, Silas opened up in small pieces, not the kind of personal stories people share to impress, but quiet truths about the pressure he carried. Aria listened without trying to fix anything. She didn't give advice unless he asked. She offered presence instead of solutions, and that eased him more than he expected. "You're easy to talk to," he said again, but this time with more weight. "You're easy to walk with," she replied. He liked that answer more than she realized. Their walks became part of their growing bond. Some evenings they talked for hours. Other nights they barely spoke, simply sharing the comfort of each other's company. Silas never pushed for closeness, and Aria never forced conversations. Their connection grew through steady steps, shared silence, and the gentle trust forming between them. One night, as they reached the end of the pier, a cold breeze moved through. Aria wrapped her arms around herself, trying to warm up. Silas noticed immediately and removed his jacket without hesitation. "You don't have to. I want you to stay warm," he said softly, placing it around her shoulders. The gesture wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to impress. It was sincere. Aria looked up at him, surprised by how naturally he offered care. Silas met her gaze without turning away. Something quiet and new settled between them in that moment. Not spoken love, not declared affection, but a gentle recognition of something deeper forming. After a few seconds he said, I don't let many people close. Aria lowered her eyes slightly. I don't either, yet we're here, he murmured. They stood at the edge of the pier, side by side, wrapped in shared warmth neither of them had expected. Their connection didn't rush forward. It didn't burn hot and loud. It grew with patience, each moment stitching them closer in slow, steady ways. By the time they walked back, their hands didn't touch, but the distance between them had changed. Something inside both of them shifted, even if they couldn't name it yet. It was the beginning of a romance that didn't need speed to feel real. One evening, their walk carried a different weight. Silas looked more tired than usual. His shoulders stayed tense, and his steady expression hinted at something he wasn't saying. Aria noticed immediately. "You're quiet tonight," she said gently. "I'm thinking," he replied. "About work?" He paused. "About everything." They reached a bench near the harbor and sat down. The water moved in soft waves, the lights stretching across its surface. Aria waited, giving Silas space to speak when he was ready. After a moment, he exhaled slowly. "I feel like I'm constantly pulled in different directions. Decisions, deadlines, people depending on me." He rubbed his forehead lightly. "It gets loud." Aria turned toward him. "That sounds heavy." "It is," he admitted. "But when I'm here with you, it feels different." He looked at her then, fully, without the weight of his responsibilities clouding his eyes. "You're the only part of my life that feels safe." The words landed softly, but they carried depth. Aria felt her breath catch. Silas didn't speak with exaggeration or charm. He spoke with sincerity, the kind that came from a place he rarely shared with anyone else. She didn't reply immediately. She didn't want to diminish the honesty in his voice. After a few seconds, she said, "I'm glad you feel that way." He shifted closer, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. "You make things quiet for me," he said. "Not empty, just calm." Aria looked down at her hands for a moment, then back at him. "You don't have to carry everything alone." "I know," he said softly. "I didn't realize how much I needed this until you came into my life." The world around them seemed to fade into the gentle rhythm of the harbor. Silas's confession wasn't grand or dramatic. It was steady, honest, and vulnerable. The kind of truth people share only when they trust deeply. Aria didn't reach for him, but she moved slightly closer. Silas noticed, and the quiet shift brought a small, grateful look to his face. That night marked a turning point, not in spoken promises, not in physical closeness, but in the simple, powerful truth that Silas had let her into the part of his world he guarded most. As Aria grew closer to Silas, she noticed a shift in the way he spoke about his work. He never shared specifics, but certain hints slipped through the cracks. He returned calls with a tight jaw. He checked messages more often. And sometimes, during their walks, his focus drifted somewhere far from the harbor. One evening, after a long day, Silas joined her at the cafe just before closing. He looked composed, but his eyes carried something unsettled. "Tough meeting?" Aria asked. He hesitated before answering. "Some people don't like the decisions I make." She studied him quietly. "Are these disagreements serious?" Silas paused, choosing his words with care. "Let's say they aren't small. When you build something valuable, people want pieces of it. Some try to take more than they should." Aria felt a small knot form in her chest. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't exaggerating. The steady tone in his voice told her this was more than workplace conflict. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "I am," he replied. "I've handled worse." But the slight tension in his shoulders said otherwise. He glanced out the window at the darkening sky. "I just didn't expect certain people to turn against me." Aria didn't push for details. She sensed he wasn't ready to disclose more. So she offered the one thing she knew he needed: calm presence. "You don't have to talk about it now," she said. "But you don't have to carry it alone." Silas looked at her, almost relieved. "That's what scares them, you know." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You make me steady. They know I think clearer when I'm not stressed. Some people prefer me distracted." Her pulse tightened at the realization. The world Silas lived in wasn't gentle. His position demanded power, strategy, and caution, and not everyone around him had clean intentions. He reached for her hand, not to hold it long, but to reassure himself. "Being with you makes everything quiet here," he said, touching his chest. Aria didn't fully understand the depth of the pressure surrounding him, but she knew one thing: Silas Rowan. His calm exterior hid a world full of tension, competition, and people who didn't want him to stay grounded. The danger wasn't visible yet, but it was close enough to cast a quiet shadow over the soft love growing between them. Aria noticed it the moment she walked into the cafe. Silas's seat by the window sat empty, untouched. The morning light streamed across the table where he usually placed his phone and coffee cup, but today, nothing waited there. He was never late. For weeks, Silas showed up at the same quiet hour. He didn't always speak much, but his presence became part of the rhythm Aria relied on. She learned the sound of his footsteps. She learned how he stood in line with patient ease. She learned how he watched the harbor before starting his day. But this morning, the door didn't open. His familiar nod didn't appear. The space he filled stayed hollow. Aria tried to continue her tasks, but her focus slipped. Every time the cafe bell rang, her eyes lifted with hope, only to drop again when it wasn't him. She told herself he might be delayed. Meetings ran over. Traffic happened. Plans changed. But none of these explanations quieted the uneasy feeling creeping into her chest. By mid-morning, the worry settled deeper. Silas wasn't the type to disappear without warning. She replayed their last conversation in her mind, searching for any sign that he had been troubled enough to withdraw. He hadn't. If anything, he had left with a soft look in his eyes, one that suggested he felt lighter, not burdened. As the hours passed, the seat by the window remained empty. The breeze outside picked up, pushing faint ripples across the harbor. Aria couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. She wiped down the counter again, though it didn't need cleaning. Her hands trembled slightly. Silas wasn't part of her routine by accident. He showed up because he wanted to. He chose that seat. He chose those mornings with her. For him to miss a day felt out of character. By the end of her shift, the worry that began as a whisper had grown into something she couldn't ignore. The world moved normally around her. Orders placed, pastries sold, conversations shared, but Aria's heart stayed heavy with the same question. Where was Silas? By the time the afternoon crowd thinned, Aria's worry had grown into something she could no longer quiet. Silas wasn't simply late. He was absent in a way that didn't match the man she had come to know. He never broke patterns without reason. He never left people guessing. His reliability had been one of the things that made her trust him. She stepped outside for a moment, hoping the fresh air would steady her. The harbor wind brushed her hair back, but it didn't ease the tension building in her chest. She checked the walkway, half expecting to see him appear with an apologetic smile or a tired shrug. Nothing. Her thoughts raced faster now. What if something happened on his way to work? What if the pressure he told her about had grown worse? What if he needed someone and she wasn't there? She reached for her phone more than once, only to pull her hand back. She didn't want to overstep. Their bond was still gentle, still forming. But the silence around him didn't feel normal. When her shift ended, she lingered behind the counter longer than usual, wiping surfaces that didn't need cleaning, checking equipment already turned off. Anything to delay walking home with unanswered questions. Finally, she stepped outside again, hoping for a sign. The bench he sometimes sat on before heading out was empty. The streetlights flickered on one by one. Evening settled across the harbor, but the sense of unease only tightened. Aria hugged her jacket around her. She whispered softly to herself, "Where are you, Silas?" She didn't know why her chest felt so heavy, but she trusted her instincts. Silas had become more than a familiar face, more than a morning routine, more than quiet conversation. He mattered to her. And tonight, everything inside her warned that something was wrong. Aria reached her apartment with a heaviness she couldn't shake. She set her bag down, but her mind stayed at the cafe doorway, replaying the empty space where Silas should have stood. Evening settled in, quiet and still, yet her thoughts kept circling the same point. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone as if willing it to ring. Minutes passed. Then, an hour. Silas had never called her directly, but tonight she wished he would. She wished for anything that might explain why he had vanished from the rhythm they built together. Just as she leaned back to steady her breath, her phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Her heart jumped. She answered quickly. "Hello?" A man's voice came through, urgent but steady. "Is this Aria Noland?" "Yes," she replied, her throat tightening. "Who is this?" "I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Silas Rowan," the voice said. "You were listed under recent contacts." Aria froze. Her pulse hammered, her worst fear pressed into her chest. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's been an accident," he said. "Mr. Rowan was brought to the hospital earlier this evening." The room spun slightly. Aria pressed her hand to her forehead, trying to stay grounded. Is he okay?" "He's stable," the man said, "but unconscious. The doctors are monitoring him. You may want to come in if you're able." Her breath caught. She grabbed her jacket without thinking. "I'm on my way." She didn't ask how they got her number. She didn't ask why she, of all people, was contacted. None of that mattered. The only thing she knew was that Silas needed someone, and she couldn't bear the thought of him facing this night alone. She stepped into the hallway with shaking hands, her heart pounding with fear she could no longer push aside. Silas was hurt, and everything inside her told her she had to reach him. Now. Aria didn't remember locking her door. She didn't remember crossing the street. She didn't remember the cold air brushing against her face. All she knew was that she needed to reach Silas. Her steps turned into quick strides, then into a full run toward the nearest taxi stand. Her breath hitched with every movement, but she didn't slow down. Fear pressed against her chest with each passing second. The world blurred around her, but she stayed focused on the only thought that mattered. Silas was hurt. She flagged down a cab with a trembling hand. "City General, please," she said, her voice tight. The driver nodded and pulled into traffic. Aria gripped the edge of her seat, her pulse racing faster than the passing lights. Questions filled her mind, each one heavier than the last. Was he awake? Was he alone? Was he in pain? Was she even allowed to be there? She swallowed hard, pushing back tears that threatened to surface. Silas had become a steady part of her world, the quiet presence she looked for every morning. The thought of him lying in a hospital bed with no familiar face nearby made her chest ache. The cab moved through the city streets, each stoplight dragging time forward too slowly. Aria pressed her hand against her heart, trying to steady the rise and fall of her breathing. She didn't want panic to cloud her judgment when she arrived. She needed to be calm for him, even if her body felt anything but. When the hospital building came into view, her breath caught. She paid quickly, barely waiting for the receipt before rushing through the sliding doors. Inside, the sterile scent and bright lights made her stomach tighten. She approached the front desk with urgency she didn't bother hiding. "I'm here for Silas Rowan," she said. "He was brought in earlier." The nurse checked the system, then nodded. "He's in the trauma wing." Straight down the hall, turn left. Aria thanked her with a quick nod and moved through the corridor, her heartbeat pulsing loud in her ears. She could feel the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her throat, the fear sitting deep in her chest. She didn't know what she would find behind the hospital room door. She didn't know if he would be conscious. She didn't know if he would need her. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She wouldn't leave him alone tonight. Aria reached the trauma wing with her heart pounding. A nurse guided her toward a room at the end of the hall, speaking softly so she wouldn't startle her further. "He's stable, but still coming out of sedation," the nurse said. "The doctor will explain more." Aria nodded, barely hearing the rest. She approached the room slowly, her hand tightening on the doorframe before she stepped inside. Silas lay on the bed, surrounded by quiet machines tracking his condition. His face looked pale, a small bandage above his eyebrow and bruising near his temple. Seeing him like that made Aria's stomach twist. He always carried himself with such steady strength. Now he looked fragile in a way she had never seen. She moved closer, whispering, "Silas." His breathing stayed even, but he didn't respond. She sat beside him, her fingers trembling as she reached for his hand. She hesitated for a moment, then gently held it, hoping her touch might offer comfort. Minutes passed before the doctor entered. He was in a collision, the doctor explained. Significant head impact. We're monitoring his neurological responses. He should wake soon. Aria nodded, keeping her eyes on Silas. Will he be okay? He's strong, the doctor said, but he may experience gaps in memory. We won't know how deep until he wakes. Her breath caught, but she stayed quiet. The room fell still as they waited. Finally Silas stirred, slow, uneasy, his brow tightening as he fought through the fog of sedation. Aria stood, her heart in her throat. "Silas?" she whispered, hope rising. His eyes opened slowly. He blinked, adjusting to the light, then lifted his gaze toward her. For a moment, she saw recognition flicker, or she wanted to believe she did. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He stared at her with calm confusion. No warmth, no familiarity, no trace of the quiet bond they shared. "Who are you?" he asked. The words hit her harder than she expected. Her hand fell away from his slowly, as if her body needed time to process what her heart already felt. She swallowed hard. "It's Aria. I'm a friend." Silas watched her carefully, searching his memory, finding nothing. "I'm sorry," he said in a soft, distant tone. "I don't remember you." Aria forced herself to stay steady, even as her chest tightened. The doctor stepped closer. "Memory loss is common with head trauma. Some memories return with time, others fade. We can't predict which ones." Aria nodded, though her throat felt tight. She didn't want to cry in front of Silas. She didn't want to add pressure to a man already fighting his own confusion. She took a slow breath, steadying her voice. "It's okay. I'm here." He didn't answer. He simply looked at her like she was a stranger standing in a room full of questions. And for the first time since meeting Silas Rowan, Aria felt truly alone beside him. Aria stepped back from Silas's bedside as voices filled the hallway. A small group approached, led by a woman with sharp features and a composed expression. Her posture held authority, and the resemblance to Silas was unmistakable. His mother. Behind her stood two men and a woman dressed in tailored business wear, members of Silas's board, judging by their clipped tone and guarded eyes. The moment they entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. Concern filled the space, but so did tension. "Silas," his mother said, moving to his side with a controlled calm. "I came as soon as I heard." Silas nodded faintly. "Mom." She brushed a hand through his hair, careful not to disturb the bandage. Then her eyes landed on Aria, steady, measuring, reserved. "And you are?" she asked. Aria straightened slightly. "Aria Noland. I was with him before he woke." One of the board members, a tall man with a cool expression, stepped closer. "Are you family?" "No," Aria replied softly. "Are you part of his staff?" Another asked. "No." The third raised a brow. "Then why were you here when he regained consciousness?" The words held suspicion, not curiosity. Aria felt the weight of their judgment settle on her shoulders. She didn't belong to Silas's corporate world. She didn't hold a title or position that made sense to them. She was simply a woman who cared for him, and that wasn't enough in their eyes. Silas's mother looked at her again, this time more pointedly. "How do you know my son?" Aria hesitated, not wanting to claim a place that might complicate things for him. "We've spent time together at the cafe near the harbor. He's been a regular there for weeks. We talked." One board member exchanged a look with another, something unspoken passing between them, doubt, concern, skepticism. Silas watched them with confusion. She seems familiar, but I don't know how." His mother gave Aria a polite but distant nod. "Thank you for sitting with him. We'll take it from here." The implication was clear. She wasn't needed, but Aria didn't move yet. She looked at Silas, hoping for some sign that he wanted her to stay. His eyes stayed calm but unreadable, lost between familiarity and uncertainty. "We need to discuss security measures," one board member said, "and review the details of the accident. The timing is concerning." Silas's mother touched his hand gently. "Rest, dear. We'll handle everything." Aria stepped back another inch, feeling the invisible wall closing in around her. She wasn't part of this world, the world of influence, strategy, and guarded power. To them, she was an outsider who didn't belong in the room with a man of Silas Rowan's standing. One of the board members gave her a final look. "Thank you for your concern," he said, tone cool. "But this is a private matter." Aria nodded, her heart tightening. "I understand." She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply turned toward the door with quiet dignity. But before she stepped out, she glanced back at Silas one more time. He stared at her with uncertainty, and something faint beneath it, something he couldn't name. Aria lowered her eyes, then walked away, carrying the ache of being pushed out of a life she had grown close to, a life she wasn't ready to lose. Aria stepped into the quiet hallway, but the sound of the door closing behind her felt louder than anything else. It marked a shift she wasn't prepared for, a sudden distance between her and Silas that she didn't know how to bridge. She stopped near the wall, pressing a hand against it to steady herself. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Nurses walked by, families whispered, machines hummed behind closed doors. Yet Aria felt alone in a way she hadn't felt in years. Just hours earlier, she believed she understood her place in Silas's life. Now she wasn't sure she had one at all. His mother's cool dismissal echoed in her mind, the skeptical looks from the board. Silas's confused stare, unable to place her. It all settled heavily inside her. She wasn't angry. She wasn't offended. She was hurt, because she cared for him deeply, because she had shared quiet moments with him, because she had stood by his side when he felt worn down by the world. And now she stood alone outside a room where decisions were being made without her, about a man she never wanted to lose. Aria considered leaving the hospital altogether, but her feet didn't move. Something inside her refused to walk away, even if the world around him didn't understand her connection to him. She stayed in the hallway, unsure of what to do but certain she couldn't go home yet. Minutes passed, slow, heavy, unkind. Then, the door opened. Silas's mother stepped out first, followed by the board members discussing hospital security and potential threats. None of them looked at Aria. She waited until the hallway cleared, then risked one more glance into the room. Silas noticed her from the bed. His eyes met hers, unsure, searching, and strangely drawn. He didn't know her. But something in him reacted when she appeared. A flicker of emotion he couldn't explain. Aria took a small step forward, then stopped herself. She didn't want to overwhelm him. She didn't want to make things harder for him. She whispered softly, more to herself than to him, "I'm still here." Silas watched her for a moment longer, before closing his eyes as, if trying to reach for a memory that stayed just out of his grasp. The distance between them felt bigger than ever, yet the pull between them remained. Emotional stakes rose sharply that night, not through arguments or dramatic outbursts, but through separation, uncertainty, and the quiet fear of losing something precious before it ever had the chance to fully bloom. Aria turned away, breathing through the ache in her chest. Silas rested in a room filled with people who claimed to know what was best for him, and the fragile thread tying their lives together stretched thin, but did not break. Aria stood in the hallway long after the board members left, and Silas's mother disappeared into a private meeting room. She knew the sensible choice would be to step away. She had no title, no claim, no recognized place in his life. To everyone else, she was nothing more than a woman who served him coffee. But her heart refused to leave. She walked back to the doorway and glanced inside. Silas lay in bed, eyes closed, breathing steady but tense. Machines beeped softly beside him. The cold fluorescent lighting washed the room in a pale glow, yet Aria focused only on his face. He looked tired, lost, alone. She had never seen him like that. Silas always moved with quiet strength. He carried calm in crowded places. He held steady even when he spoke of stress. But tonight, his stillness came from discomfort, not peace. And Aria couldn't walk away knowing he faced that alone. Her breath trembled slightly as she stepped inside again. She didn't go far, only to the chair by the wall. She sat quietly, hands folded, heart heavy but certain. She whispered to herself, "I won't leave you tonight." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a promise built from sincerity, the same sincerity she offered him long before the accident. Minutes passed. Silas shifted lightly, waking again. His eyes opened slowly, and he noticed her presence. Confusion flickered across his face, but it wasn't sharp like earlier. It was softer, almost questioning. "You're still here," he murmured. Aria nodded with a gentle steadiness. "I didn't want you to be alone." He studied her for a moment, searching her face carefully. Not for a memory. He had already tried and failed to find that. He searched for intention. "Why?" he asked. She answered honestly, "Because you matter to me." Silas blinked, taking that in. He didn't respond, but his gaze didn't turn away this time. He didn't ask her to leave. He didn't insist she step aside for others. He simply watched her like someone trying to understand a truth he couldn't recall. Aria didn't push closer. She stayed where she sat, respectful of his space, yet unwilling to abandon the connection they once shared. She accepted a painful reality. He didn't know her anymore, but she knew him, and that was enough for her to stay. She settled deeper into the chair, prepared for a long night. Silas closed his eyes again, not in fear this time, but in quiet acceptance. He slept. She kept watch. It wasn't the reunion she once imagined. It wasn't the moment she hoped for, but it was the beginning of something new, the love story she refused to abandon. The next morning, Aria returned to the hospital before sunrise. She hadn't slept much, but she didn't care. All she wanted was to be near Silas, even if he didn't fully understand why she stayed. She carried a small notebook in her hand, the one she had filled with pieces of their time together. Moments she cherished, words he once said, simple memories that had shaped their quiet bond. When she stepped into his room, Silas was awake, sitting slightly upright. He looked tired, but his eyes held a calm curiosity when he saw her. "You came back," he said softly. "I said I would," she replied. He watched her take a seat beside him. He didn't ask her to explain herself. He didn't question her presence the way others had. Instead, he observed her with a quiet interest, as if something in him recognized comfort, even if he couldn't remember the source. Aria held up the notebook. "I wrote things down, things we shared. They helped me feel close to you when we weren't together. I thought, maybe they could help you too." Silas looked at the notebook, then at her. "You kept those?" She nodded. "Not because I expected this, just because those moments meant something to me." His expression softened. "You can read them, if you want." Aria opened to the first page, her fingers steady despite her rising emotions. She began with something simple, the morning he held the door open for a stranger while balancing a cup of coffee, unaware she watched from inside. She described the way he paused to let an elderly couple pass, the way he smiled politely when they thanked him. Silas listened quietly, hands resting on the blanket. She read another memory, the evening he waited outside the cafe on a windy night, telling her. He just happened to be nearby when she knew he had taken a detour from his usual route. As she spoke, Silas's eyes drifted downward, as though he was searching for the feeling behind each story. She continued with slow, careful words. The day he noticed she was tired and paused their walk just to give her a moment to breathe. The time he brought her pastries because he remembered how long her shift had been. The way he laughed softly when she teased him about his choice of tea. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, just the truth of who he had been with her. When she paused, Silas looked at her with a softened gaze. "These sound like moments someone would remember. They were moments you lived," she said gently. He didn't respond. He didn't pretend to recall. But something in his expression shifted. Not recognition, but connection. "Can you read more?" he asked quietly. Aria nodded. "As many as you want." And for the first time since the accident, the room felt warm. As Aria continued reading, the soft rhythm of her voice filled the room. Each memory painted a picture of the man Silas had been before the accident. Thoughtful, observant, gentle in ways most people never saw. But while she spoke, Silas's expression began to change. His gaze drifted away, not in boredom but in struggle. He stared ahead, eyes fixed on a point only he could see, as though he was reaching for something hidden deep within him. The calm in his face thinned, replaced by a quiet tension. Aria paused. "Silas, are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. His chest rose slowly, his jaw tightening with concentration. His fingers pressed lightly against the blanket, and he inhaled as if trying to pull a memory into focus. "I'm trying," he said at last. His voice was soft, strained. "I hear what you're saying. I believe the words. But I don't feel them yet." Aria's heart tightened. She wanted to reach for his hand, but she didn't move closer unless he welcomed it. "You don't have to force it," she replied gently. "Memories aren't something you chase. They show up when they're ready." Silas turned his head slightly, his distant stare lingering for another long moment. The weight of not remembering sat heavily in his eyes. The man who once carried calm with ease now wrestled with a silence inside his own mind. "It's strange," he said quietly. "Hearing these moments, knowing they happened, and feeling nothing familiar, it makes me feel like I lost a part of myself I should recognize." Aria felt the ache in his words. "You didn't lose who you are," she whispered. "You're still you. Memories or not." He looked at her then, the distance in his eyes slowly shifting into something softer. Not recognition, but trust. A quiet trust that wasn't built from memory, but from her presence. "You sound sure," he murmured. "I am," she said. Silas exhaled, the tension easing, though not fully leaving. The distant stare came back for a second, but this time it held less confusion and more searching. As if the stories she shared had planted something inside him he wasn't ready to name. Aria opened the notebook again, waiting for his signal. "Keep reading," he said. And she did. Aria continued reading from the notebook, her voice low and steady. The stories weren't dramatic. They weren't meant to stir excitement. They were simple reflections of the life Silas once lived beside her. Small gestures, quiet evenings, thoughtful conversations. Yet as she spoke, Silas's posture changed. His shoulders relaxed little by little. His fingers unclenched from the blanket. His chest rose and fell with slower, calmer breaths. The earlier tension he carried, the strain of trying to remember, the frustration of empty spaces in his mind, eased as her words settled over him like a soft blanket. He wasn't trying to force memories anymore. He was simply listening. Aria noticed the shift almost immediately. She paused mid-sentence, watching him carefully. "Do you want me to stop?" she asked. Silas shook his head faintly. "No. Keep going. Your voice makes everything feel less crowded." She understood what he meant. The accident had left him with noise inside his thoughts, too many questions too. Many expectations, too much pressure from people demanding clarity he couldn't give. But Aria didn't expect anything. She didn't push. She didn't demand answers from a man who couldn't find them yet. He breathed more slowly with each memory she shared. When she spoke about the way he once walked her home after a long shift, his breathing softened. When she told him how he always noticed when her days were heavy, his breathing steadied. When she read the line he wrote in his old journal, "She quiets the world. For me," his breathing slowed until the tension left his body entirely. Aria closed the notebook gently, not wanting to overwhelm him. She waited, giving him space to absorb the moment. Silas opened his eyes and looked at her with a calm she hadn't seen since before the accident. "I don't remember any of it," he said softly. "But I feel at ease. I haven't felt that since I woke up." Aria smiled, a small, tender smile that reached her eyes. "That's enough for now." Silas exhaled again, The kind of breath that releases weight instead of holding it in. I don't know why, but when you speak, everything feels steady. Aria nodded slowly. Maybe it's because you were steady with me too. He didn't respond, but the way he looked at her said everything. For the first time since the accident, peace settled around him. Not because he remembered her, but because his heart recognized the calm she brought. Aria opened the notebook again, turning to a short entry she had written months before. It wasn't a long moment, not one of their harbor walks or slow evenings together. It was a simple memory, one she had held close because of how quietly meaningful it was. "Do you remember this day?" she asked gently, though she didn't expect a yes. "You came to the shop late in the evening. Everyone else was gone. You sat by the window and watched the water for almost an hour." Silas listened, eyes lowered. "You didn't say why you stayed," Aria continued. "But when you left, you said, 'Thank you for the quiet.'" Silas's breathing paused for a moment, not a gasp, not shocked, just a stillness, sharp, brief, and unmistakable. Aria noticed immediately. "Silas." He lifted his head slowly, a faint crease forming between his brows. His gaze wasn't distant this time. It was focused, searching, drawn toward something he couldn't name but could feel. "That phrase," he murmured. "It feels close, like I've heard it before, like I said before." Aria's chest tightened. She didn't want to assume anything, but she also didn't want to ignore what she saw. The soft flicker in his expression, the subtle warmth rising in his eyes. He pressed a hand lightly to his temple. "It's not a memory," he said carefully. "More like a faint echo." Aria nodded. "That's enough. That's something." Silas looked at her longer now, not with confusion, not with discomfort, but with a quiet pull. His eyes softened, as if the space between them wasn't unfamiliar anymore. "When you said the word quiet, something shifted," he admitted. "Like I've trusted you before, even if I don't remember how." Aria's breath caught, but she stayed steady. She didn't lean in. She didn't rush. She simply held his gaze with the same gentleness she had always shown him. "You did trust me," she said softly. He blinked, the flicker growing into a small, warm spark. Not a memory, a connection. "I think," Silas whispered, "part of me still does." The words settled in the room with quiet weight. For the first time since the accident, something inside him reached toward her, not through recollection but through instinct. A flicker of familiarity, a flicker of the man who once walked beside her along the harbor, a flicker of the bond they had built slowly, honestly, and without pressure. Aria exhaled with relief, her heart warming at the sight. It wasn't recovery, it wasn't a miracle, but it was hope, soft, real, and finally within reach. The room settled into a calm that felt different from the hours before. Silas no longer looked overwhelmed or guarded. He watched Aria with a quiet interest, as though something inside him urged him to understand the woman sitting at his bedside. He cleared his throat lightly. "Can I ask you something?" Aria smiled softly. "Of course." He hesitated, choosing his first question with care. "When we spent time together, was I kind to you?" Her eyes softened. "Yes." "Always?" Silas nodded slowly, as if that answer eased something deep inside him. "Did I make you feel comfortable?" "You did," she said. "You were patient with me." He absorbed that quietly, then asked another. "Did we laugh together?" Aria's smile warmed. Many times, Silas lowered his gaze, tracing the blanket with his fingertips. "Did I ever make you feel like you were carrying everything alone?" "Never." He looked up again, this time with a deeper curiosity. "Why did you keep these memories?" His voice stayed gentle. "Why write them down?" Aria held the notebook on her lap, running her thumb along the edge. "Because they meant something to me. They reminded me of who you were on the quieter days." Silas's expression softened. "I want to know that version of myself." "You will," she assured him. Slowly. He nodded, then leaned back, his eyes lingering on her with a new kind of steadiness. "Can I ask another?" Aria laughed lightly. "As many as you want." He paused, his voice dropping into something more personal. "Why did you stay when you didn't have to. Aria met his gaze without looking away. Because you mattered to me before the accident, and you still matter now. Silas inhaled deeply, the weight of that truth settling around him. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't an expectation. It was sincerity, something he needed more than answers. After a few seconds, he whispered, "Thank you." Aria reached for the chair, pulling it closer so he wouldn't strain to see her. "We'll take this one step at a time." Silas nodded again. "I'd like that." A quiet peace filled the space between them. Then Aria added, gently and naturally, "If you're listening to this story, and you believe love takes patience, understanding, and steady steps, don't forget to support this channel. Your comments help us grow stronger, and your subscription keeps these stories alive." Silas glanced at her, unaware she had shifted to speaking to the audience, but sensing warmth in her tone. Aria smiled softly and returned her focus to him. "Ready for more?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes." "Stay a little longer." And she did. Silas left the hospital with a careful step, the weight of his recovery pressing against him in ways he couldn't fully explain. His memories came in fragments, shadows of moments that never settled long enough to be recognized. But one thing felt steady, even in the confusion. Aria. She walked beside him, not guiding, not leading, simply matching his pace. He didn't know why her presence grounded him, but he accepted it without resistance. Even without remembering their past, something about her steadiness eased the noise in his mind. The first days at home were quiet. Silas struggled to reconnect with his routine, often pausing mid-task as if waiting for familiarity to return. Aria stayed close, giving him space, yet never letting him feel isolated. She answered his small questions, explained the simple habits he used to follow, and gently reminded him when fatigue set in. Trust rebuilt itself slowly. Silas learned that he didn't have to pretend around her. When he forgot details, she didn't show disappointment. When he grew frustrated, she didn't pull back. She stayed steady, the same way she always had before the accident. One evening, as the sun lowered behind the city skyline, Silas asked if she wanted to walk with him. They returned to the harbor, the place where their connection had begun the first time. They walked side by side, their shoulders brushing lightly. Silas glanced at her often, studying the calm set of her features, the way the wind lifted strands of her hair, the way her silence carried comfort instead of distance. He didn't remember falling for her, but he understood now how easily it could have happened. Halfway down the pier, he stopped and turned toward her. "Aria," he said quietly, "do you expect us to go back?" She looked at him with gentle honesty. "No. We move forward." Those words settled inside him like a truth he needed. He nodded slowly, as though something inside him aligned for the first time since the accident. They continued their walk, but the space between them shifted. Silas didn't reach for her hand yet, but he moved closer, drawn by a feeling he couldn't name. When they reached the end of the pier, he asked softly, "Was I good to you before?" Aria smiled. "You were patient, thoughtful, real." Silas lowered his gaze. "I want to be that man again." "You already are," she replied. Her words warmed him. He didn't understand why emotion rose so easily around her now, but he didn't hide it. Her presence brought clarity, even when his memories remained dim. Later that night, Aria helped him sort through some of his personal belongings, hoping familiar objects might spark something inside him. They opened a small drawer filled with papers and notebooks. One leather journal caught Aria's eye. "This one was important to you," she said gently. Silas sat on the couch as she placed it in his hands. He opened it slowly, flipping through entries written in short, deliberate lines. Some pages held business notes. Others contained simple reflections. Then he paused at a page with a single sentence written in his handwriting. "She brings peace when the world expects noise." Silas inhaled softly, the words striking him with unexpected force. He looked up at Aria, his expression shifting, deepening. "This was about you," he whispered. Aria held his gaze. "Yes." He read the line again, then closed the journal with a careful touch. "I still feel that," he admitted. Even without remembering, Aria's eyes softened. Your heart never forgot. Silas reached for her hand then, slow and sure. She didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined gently, the closeness quiet but powerful. In that moment, Silas Rowan didn't reclaim a memory. He reclaimed a feeling, and that was the beginning of falling for her all over again. Silas invited Aria to his penthouse one quiet evening, wanting company without pressure. He didn't know why he gravitated toward her so naturally, but the pull felt steady, familiar, and safe. When they stepped inside, he walked past the living room and opened the doors leading to the balcony. I come out here when I need to think, he said. The view stretched across the skyline, with gentle lights flickering against the darkening sky. Aria stepped closer to the railing, her hands resting lightly on the cool metal. Silas stood beside her, close enough to feel her warmth but not touching. He studied her quietly. Her calm, her steady breath, her quiet presence. Everything about her softened something inside him he didn't know how to name. Being out here with you feels different, he said. Better. Aria looked up at him, her heart rising with emotion, and she tried to hold steady. I'm glad you feel comfortable. Silas shifted slightly, turning more toward her. It's more than comfort. When you're here, the noise in my head clears. She swallowed gently. I'm glad I can help. But her voice carried a tremor she didn't expect him to notice. He did. Aria, he said softly, are you afraid of something? She hesitated. Losing someone once is hard. Losing them twice. Her words faded before she finished the sentence. She didn't want to burden him with the fear sitting in her chest, the fear that he might pull away someday, because their history lived only inside her heart now. Silas stepped closer, his brow softening. I may not remember everything, but I feel what you mean to me now. That isn't something I'm confused about. Her eyes lowered. I don't want to hold on to something that hurts you. You're not hurting me, he said, his voice low, steady. You're helping me find pieces of myself. The air between them shifted, not heavy, not rushed, warm. Silas lifted his hands slowly, giving her time to move if she wanted. She didn't. His fingers brushed her cheek gently, the touch careful and sincere. He didn't move with the confidence of a man remembering a lover. He moved with the instinct of someone drawn to a feeling he trusted. I don't remember our first kiss, he whispered. I want to feel this one. Now. Aria breathed in slowly, her eyes meeting his. She didn't lean forward. She didn't close the distance. She let him guide the moment. Silas leaned in, slow and deliberate, giving her time to stop him if the moment felt wrong. It didn't. Their lips met softly, a gentle, lingering kiss that held more honesty than passion, more emotion than intensity. It was quiet, warm, steady, and even though it wasn't tied to memory, it carried the depth of two hearts finding each other again. When they parted, Silas rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing slowly. I felt that, he whispered. I didn't need the past to tell me anything. Aria's eyes glistened. I felt it too. They stayed close, neither rushing the moment nor trying to define what came next. The kiss hadn't restored their history, but it awakened something real in the present, the beginning of a bond rebuilding itself from the ground up. Silas brushed her cheek again. Stay with me a little longer? She nodded. I'm here. A calm settled over the balcony, wrapping around them like a quiet promise. And gently, Aria spoke with a soft smile. If you're still here listening and this moment touched your heart, take a second to support this channel. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions help keep stories like this alive. Silas didn't understand she was speaking to the audience, but he felt the warmth in her tone and watched her with quiet affection. The night deepened. Their connection did too. Silas woke to soft light easing through the curtains and a quiet warmth beside him. He blinked slowly, adjusting to the morning, then looked down at his hand. Aria's hand was still in his. She had fallen asleep sitting upright, her head resting lightly against the back of the couch. Her fingers remained linked with his, as if she never loosened her hold through the night. For a moment, Silas didn't move. He watched her with a calm he hadn't felt since before the accident. Something inside him stirred. Not a memory, not a flash of the past, but a feeling steady enough to anchor him. When Aria shifted slightly, her eyes opened. She sat up quickly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to fall asleep." "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm glad you stayed." She studied him, searching his expression for signs of discomfort. "How do you feel?" He looked at their joined hands. "Better than yesterday." Then he lifted his eyes to hers. "Thank you for not rushing me." "We take it one step at a time," she said. "Healing isn't a race." Silas nodded, absorbing her words carefully. "Patience is something you've given me since the first day I woke up." Aria smiled, a soft curve that reached her eyes. "You're doing well." A quiet moment settled between them before Silas asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Did we kiss like that before?" Aria felt her breath catch, but she answered with gentle honesty. "Once. It was slow. You were always careful with me." Silas looked down, touched by something he couldn't quite describe. "I don't remember the moment, but the way it felt last night." His voice lowered. It didn't feel new. Aria didn't push him to explain further. She didn't read into it more than he offered. She simply let the truth sit warmly between them. Silas stood, stretching lightly, then reached for her hand again, not out of habit, but intention. "There's somewhere I want to take you." Aria looked surprised. "Now?" He nodded. "I don't know everything about our past, but I want to start building things I can connect to, moments that belong to today, not yesterday." She rose slowly. "Where are we going?" Silas slipped on his jacket, moving with quiet purpose. "Somewhere that feels right. You'll see." He held the door open for her, the same way he always had before the accident, not out of memory but instinct. As she stepped out, their hands brushed, and the contact sent a warm ripple through both of them. Silas didn't fully understand what was happening inside him. Aria didn't expect clarity overnight, but as they walked into the morning together, one truth settled quietly in his chest. His heart was waking up, piece by piece, guided by the woman who never left his side. Silas drove with steady hands, the morning air cool through the open window. Aria sat beside him, unsure of where they were going, but she sensed a purpose in his silence. His eyes stayed focused on the road, but every few minutes he glanced at her as if grounding himself. When the car slowed, Aria recognized the turn before he parked. The harbor, the place where everything once shifted between them. She stepped out slowly, her breath catching as the familiar scent of salt and morning wind surrounded them. Silas walked ahead a few steps, looking out at the calm water. He didn't seem confused. He didn't seem unsure. He looked drawn. "Why here?" she asked gently. Silas kept his gaze on the water. "When I woke up the first week, nothing made sense. My world felt loud, crowded, heavy." He paused. "But last night, something inside me settled. And this morning, I kept thinking of a place I'd never visited in my mind, but somehow felt tied to." Aria walked closer, her heart thudding softly. "This was where we spent a lot of time together." He nodded. "I didn't know that. Not until now." He turned to her, eyes soft. "But the moment we stepped out of the car, something in me reacted. Not memory. Something else." Aria swallowed hard. "What do you feel?" Silas stepped closer, studying her face with deep focus. "Safe." He took her hand, slow and warm. "You bring a kind of quiet I don't get anywhere else." Her chest tightened. The wind brushed against them, but neither moved away. Silas looked around the harbor again. If the past never returns, he shifted his gaze back to her. "I still want a future with you." Aria's breath broke. Her hand lifted to her mouth as her eyes filled quickly. She tried to steady herself, but the weight of his words hit a place she had held closed since the accident. Silas stepped closer, concern softening his features. "Aria." She shook her head gently, tears slipping freely. "I didn't know if you would ever say something like that again." He lifted both her hands to his chest, holding them firmly. "I may never recall every detail. I may never see our past the way you do. But this feeling," he drew in a slow breath, This feeling is real. Aria pressed her forehead lightly against his chest, her shoulders trembling. Silas wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a steady embrace. He didn't rush to soothe her. He simply held her, letting her release weeks of quiet fear. When she finally looked up, Silas brushed her cheeks with gentle fingertips. "There's something else," he said softly. She blinked, waiting. He leaned close, his voice a quiet echo of a moment he no longer remembered. "This is the one place I don't want to leave." Aria's knees weakened at the words. She reached for him, cupping his face with both hands. Her tears weren't from pain this time. They were from relief, from seeing a piece of the man she loved rise again through instinct, not memory. Silas kissed her forehead, then rested his own against hers. "Tell me one thing," he whispered. "Are you still willing to stay with me?" Aria nodded, her voice unsteady but clear. "Always." They stood together at the harbor where their love first grew, not replaying the past, choosing the future. Silas and Aria stood side by side at the harbor, not clinging to lost moments, but holding on to the quiet truth they had rebuilt. His memories had not returned the way people hoped, yet the connection between them grew. Stronger with each day he chose to understand her, to trust her, to stay present with her. Their story didn't end with a sudden breakthrough. It moved forward through steady steps, the same way it began. Silas squeezed her hand gently. "I don't know everything we shared," he said, "but I know the kind of person you are. And I know how I feel when you're close." Aria lifted her eyes to him, soft and certain. "That's enough." In that moment, their journey offered a lesson that reached far beyond their own hearts. Love is not memory. Love is consistency. It lives in the way two people show up for each other, even when the circumstances change. It grows through patience, understanding, and steady choices. Aria didn't stay because she needed him to remember the past. She stayed because she believed in the person he was at his core. And Silas didn't reach for her because of stored memories. He reached because his heart recognized safety, truth, and peace. Healing takes time. Not every wound closes quickly. Not every loss is restored. But healing begins when people allow space for honesty, when they show kindness even during uncertainty, and when they honor the pace of their hearts instead of rushing toward a perfect ending. Silas didn't need his past to return in detail to understand that Aria mattered. Aria didn't need him to recall every moment to see his sincerity. Love met them where they were, not where they used to be. Their story became a reminder for anyone listening. When life changes without warning, when the people you care about hurt, forget, or drift, patience can guide you forward. Small actions hold more weight than big promises. And sometimes, love deepens in ways no one expects. Silas turned to Aria with a small smile. "Let's write new moments," he whispered. Aria nodded. Together, they walked forward, steady and aligned, choosing each other in the present. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories your way.